Hello and welcome, everyone. This is Keely Linton. I'm the Executive Director for Strong-Hearted Native Women's Coalition, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Just a couple housekeeping notes. We do have questions and chat tab that you can use either one of those, and we'll answer those as we go along or at the end of the presentation, which is ever convenient. We are recording this session just so that everyone knows, and we will have opportunity at the end of the session for you to ask questions. We'll unmute everyone so that you can jump in and ask questions if you feel the need to do that. The other thing also is we know that sometimes there's some private or maybe some confidential questions that you may want to ask. So at the end of the session, after some Q&A, we will turn off the recording so that you can ask some questions off recordings in case that's a little bit more comfortable for you. So without further ado, today we have Rain McNeill here. He is a project coordinator for the Domestic Violence Prevention Initiative at the California Rural Indian Health Board. He has held this position since 2017. He aims to reduce intimate partner violence, sexual assault, and promote the development and implementation of evidence-based and practice-based models of domestic violence prevention. Rain holds a master's degree in social work and therapeutic recreation administration and a bachelor's of science in sociology. For 20 years, Rain has worked in the clinical social work, education, child abuse, and substance abuse area. Most of this work was in child welfare and child protection services. He is currently an associate social worker within the state of California. Rain is a frequent regional and national presenter and workshop leader focused on creating safe and inclusive communities. He is part of several organizations and entities and aimed at violence prevention such as NICWA, Red Women Rising, MMIW, and the Interagency Prevention Advisory Council. Rain is originally from North Carolina and is a wartime Navy veteran. Welcome, Rain. I'm so excited to have you. We love working with you. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. That was about the most positive thing I've heard all week, so that really gets me energized. Thank you for that introduction. And so, do you want me to go ahead and start? How do you want to do it? Because I want to make sure that everyone understands the ACES link so they can get their score while we're doing the webinar, and then we'll go from there. So can you talk about the link and share that with folks, or do I need to pull up on my screen the PowerPoint?
Oh no, I'll pull up your PowerPoint just in a minute. So the ACES, we have an ACES link in the chat tab that everyone could look at, and so hopefully you can click on that tab when it's time and get that going for you. If there's any technical issues, please just chat us in the tab box, and we will get that up and going for you, or hopefully up and going for you. So here, I'm going to start your PowerPoint for us. And any other technical issues or questions anyone has, you're more than welcome to let us know in the tab.
Thank you, Keely. So welcome everyone. I'm excited to be here today. I hope everyone is here to learn a little bit about ACEs and the stress surrounding childhood trauma. As Keely said, I'm with the California Rural Indian Health Board as their Domestic Violence Prevention Initiative Coordinator. I love that job, but ACEs is one of those things that's kind of on the periphery of what we do. And so, you know, other tasks as assigned in my job description. And so ACEs is one of those things that I've worked with for a lot. So this is going to be a basic overview talking about ACEs, the history of childhood trauma, what that looks like, and stress, and how we deal with stress today. And, you know, with everything going on around us, we can have those conversations around what that looks like. Next slide. So I always like to do a blessing before I do a class. I know that would be kind of hard today, so we'll skip that part. But we're going to talk about, again, exploring stress, the ACEs piece, and intergenerational trauma, which I think we all are familiar with if you do this kind of work. And then we'll do questions, comments, debrief, healing, and we'll go from there. One of the things I want everyone to understand is some of the stuff that I talk about is emotional. It is impactful to people who have had trauma in their life. And so I always want to be aware of our audience and make sure that you are seeking the help you need if some of this stuff creates a trigger for you or emotions that you haven't dealt with for a while. And so one of the good things about today's session is I'll try to have us out of here as early as I can, because to be respectful of others' times. And so we'll move as fastly as we can. Please put comments in the chat so I can answer them. I love the interaction with the audience. And so doing webinars is a little rough for me because I really like to gauge mannerisms and expressions as I do these sort of trainings. So please comment as much as you want in the chat. Let me know what you think or don't think or you're feeling at the moment. So we'll just go ahead and jump right in. Next slide. Next slide. So it's just about self-care. We talked about that already. So this is a video that kind of sets the table for us today. And it's pretty self-explanatory. We'll get into everything once the video is over. So we'll start with the video and kind of go from there.
One day, a young boy asked his father, "What is the value of his life?" Instead of answering, the father told his son to take this rock and go sell it at a market. If anybody asks the price, raise 2 fingers and don't say anything. The boy then went to the market, and a woman asked, "How much is this rock? I want to put it in my garden." The boy didn't say anything and raised up 2 fingers, and the woman said, $2? I'll take it. And the boy went home and told his father, "The woman wants to buy this rock for $2. The father then said, "Son, I want you to take this rock to a museum. If anybody wants to buy it, don't say a word and just put up 2 fingers. The boy then went to the museum, and a man wanted to buy the rock. The boy didn't say a word and just put up 2 fingers. And the man said, $200, I'll take it. The boy was shocked and went running home and told his father, "A man wants to buy this rock for $200. His father then said, "Son, the last place I want you to take this rock is to a precious stone store. Show it to the owner and don't say a word. And if he asks the price, just put up 2 fingers." The son then went to a precious stone store. He showed the rock to the owner. "Where did you find this stone? It is one of the most rarest stones in the world. I must have it. How much would you sell it for?" The boy put up 2 fingers, and the man said, "I'll take it for $200,000. The boy, not knowing what to say, ran home to his father. "Father, there's a man that wants to buy this stone for $200,000. His father then said, "Son, do you know the value of your life now? You see, it doesn't matter where you come from, where you're born, the color of your skin, or how much money you were born into. It matters where you decide to place yourself, the people you surround yourself with, and how you choose to carry yourself. You may have lived your whole life thinking that you were a $2 stone. You may have lived your whole life surrounded by people that saw your worth for only $2. But everybody has a diamond inside them. And we can choose to surround ourselves with people that see our value and see the diamond inside of us. We can choose to put ourselves in a market or put ourselves in a precious stone store. And you can also choose to see the value in other people. You can help other people see the diamond inside of them. Choose the people you surround yourself wisely. And that can make all the difference in your life. I love you all. and I wish you all the best. My name is Sean Uranahiran. Will you come? You can be surrounded by a future that only see your value of $2, or you can choose to be around people that see your value at $200,000. And some people will see you as priceless.
Okay, so I love to show that video because it speaks to the value of the lives that we live and the value that we place not only on our lives, but the lives of the people we surround ourselves with. And how much of that is affected by trauma, the things that happen to us that shape what we think our value is, and how it shapes our value. I don't think that we talk about that enough. The value that we see in people, and most times we have relationships where that value is, what can I get out of this person, instead of what value does this person do in enriching my life. And so I love that video because it goes straight to the heart of those relationships that we have, the people we surround ourselves with, and how they help affect our traumas positively and negatively. Next slide. Okay, so today this is all about stress and trauma, right? This is what the stuff we're talking about. So the concept of stress, the psychology of stress. Basically what stress is the feeling of being overwhelmed. It occurs when an individual perceives the environmental demands tax or exceed their ability to deal with those stressors. And so we talk about stress and the way it affects us, from a social worker standpoint. There's so many layers to that. And so how do we address what stress is, what it means to us, how do we have it? So what are some of our stressors? We'll look around today's world. COVID-19, that's our number one stressor, or one of our number one stressors. If you're African-American male in the United States right now, there's a little bit of stress for you in this society, right? And so then you take away those two very large sort of elephants in the room, and we look around at other stressors. Our physical health, obviously, employment, family stressors, those interpersonal relationships that happen. What do all those things do to our collective stress levels? And so that's some of the stuff we're going to talk about today. Next slide. Okay, so acute stress. And there's really three forms of stress that we as behavioral health specialists or social workers talk about, acute being one. Most common form of psychological stress, and it's usually situational, or something happened, an event, a big event, having a baby, loss of life, loss of employment, buying a home, those sort of things. Not necessarily bad. Like I said, the stress that comes from buying a home looks totally different than the stress from losing your mother or father to disease or to death. It's usually short term. Some of those examples are reaction to a horror film, like I said, buying a home, feeling before public speaking, the thrill of riding a roller coaster, meeting deadlines, about to ask your potential honey on a date. Now, some of these are good stress. The feeling of, you're getting ready to ask someone on a date creates those butterflies that we have, and that endorphin level, goes through the roof. That's a good stress to have, we usually think. Real roller coasters is another one. People get on a roller coaster expecting to be scared, and that anxiety builds and it's released when they get to the end of that. Horror movies, the same thing. We go to watch horror movies to be scared. We go to stress ourselves out. As if our world isn't stressed enough and creates enough anxiety for us. People love horror movies. They love to go and watch them and be scared. And that's a good kind of reaction to have when that's the purpose that you're going for. Next slide. And remember, there's 3 different forms of stress that we kind of talk about as professionals. Episodic stress, acute stress that's suffered too frequently, talking on too much and becoming overwhelmed from demands and expectations. We all know this person, the crisis after crisis friend or colleague that we have. Everything is a crisis for them. It could be the smallest thing or the biggest thing, and they react the same. Type A personalities are prone to episodic stress. Type A personalities are, for lack of better words, control freaks. And when they can't control every part of their life, it creates a lot of stress for them. The episodes eventually end, they're not chronic. And so this just means it's a period of time, short period of time, not chronic or long lasting. Next slide. Chronic stress. Now, this is a long-term stressor. This is unending stress. And these are, some of the examples: chronic illness, unhealthy or abusive relationships, which is one of the things we've talked about in this series, is the violence that our community suffers from. Poverty. A lot of our Native communities suffer extreme poverty, suffer extreme oppression and extreme racism. So a lot of the chronic stressors that we're going to talk about, they never go away for our communities, especially our Native communities. That stress is there constantly, and it's ever present. And that creates certain anxiety within those populations. And so one of the things I want everyone to kind of concentrate on today is, what are some of those societal or systemic, stressors out there that are chronic to our everyday living? If you live in a geographically isolated area, your stressors are going to look a little different than if you live in an urban area. Even something as basic as education. If you live in Santa Rosa, the education system for you looks way different than if you live in, say, Porterville or Eureka or somewhere a little bit more isolated. And so those are some of the things we'll get into today. Okay, next slide. Can you hear me, Keely? Is all stress bad? No. Okay, we're having some technical difficulties here. I'll let Keely get that worked out real quick. I think you need to go back about 2 slides. So you want to go to the next slide after that, Keely. Can you hear me, Keely? Okay, I can't hear Keely, so I'm going to do this. I'm going to jump in here, and if you guys can see this, let me know in the chat, and we will keep it moving as fast as we can. Can everyone see me, hear me?
Hey, Rain, this is Joy. Keely's computer is frozen right now.
Okay, can everyone see my screen now?
No, let me make you, I'm going to change you to a presenter.
Okay.
Okay, now you're the presenter, so it'll be it will be your screen that we see. There we go.
Oh, okay. So is that better?
Yes, sir.
All right, well, let me just get to the slide we were at, and we'll just keep it going.
Perfect.
Okay, Here we are. Can everyone see that, or can you see it? Make sure it's all good before I keep going.
It's perfect.
Excellent. So, is all stress bad? In a nutshell, the answer is no. Some stress, stress is actually beneficial, be it psychological, physical, or biological. Positive response one has to a stressor can leave people feeling with feelings of fulfillment. And the main reason for that is you have something that triggers your stress, be it, say, a promotion. Now, the promotion itself causes stress because you start to wonder, am I qualified? Is this going to make sense? All the things that come up. Then you get into the position and you recognize that I can do this. You can be whatever it is you're promoted to. And so what that does is that leaves you as the person who had that stress, who had that anxiety, with feelings of fulfillment. As you become more comfortable, you decide to self-validate. Yeah, I deserve this raise. Yes, I did deserve to be promoted. And so that is a really good form of stress that we don't necessarily get a lot of in our daily lives, but it absolutely is a positive. Distress is bad stress. Manifest as anxiety, nervousness, worry. And really what that boils down to is a perceived inability to meet demands. And this is what we see more on a daily basis. The anxiety, the nervousness, the worry, the self-doubt that we put upon ourselves in our abilities to do the jobs that we're asked to do or to fill the roles that we're asked to fill. And so not all stress is bad stress, which is what I want you guys to remember about this. The physiology of psychology and psychology of stress, because there is a physical piece to this. So if you know me, you know that I spent a lot of time. I was in the military for 8 years. A lot of that was overseas during Desert Storm. Now, this is not going to make sense to anyone, but I actually joined the Navy out of high school. And I was definitely afraid of sharks. And I don't mean like, oh, I'm scared of sharks. I mean, like my mom and dad took me to see Jaws when I was 8 or 9, and I never got over it afraid. And so sharks are something that even in my dreams still scare me. And they scare a lot of people. And so when I saw this slide, it just made total sense to me. So you're a surfer off the coast of California, and that on your very left part of your screen pops up. That's the stimulus. You now know there's this huge shark in the water with you. You see it, you immediately feel it. What do? So your visceral response is what? To run or to flee. Absolutely. Your emotional response is to fear it, obviously. And so this is a really good sort of explanation of how we address stress or anxiety or trauma that we're seeing. Most of us are going to do one of three things: fight, flight, or freeze. For me, if I was in the water and that was in the water with me, I'm so scared of sharks, I would probably just freeze and need help getting back to shore. That's just where my brain goes when I see images like that. We all have those. Some people, it may be a scary dog. Other people, it may be something happening to their child. But we all have this stimuli that we have a visceral, immediate response to. What are the physical effects of stress? Those can vary. You know, we all are different in how we approach things, how things affect us. And so when we're talking about stress, it can manifest in different ways. Respiratory, breathe harder, possibly triggering asthma attacks, hyperventilation. We've all seen the movies where the scary guy comes out of the closet and the helpless young lady hyperventilates and has asthma as she's running through the woods with one shoe on. You know, that's a definitive sort of reaction to stress. Absolutely. Cardiovascular, immediate increased heart rate, dilation of blood vessels. I see a shark in the water with me, that's exactly what happens. My heart rate's going through the roof, and all my blood vessels are going to open up and start pumping quick because my heart's going to be in overdrive. Chronic hypertension or chronic cardiovascular stress would lead to hypertension, inflammation of blood vessels, and heart attacks. Now, I'm old enough to remember a guy on television in the 70s, Fred Sanford, who had a heart attack every episode because of some stimuli that set him off. And so even though that was comical, it was based in science, in that a lot of folks in our country and across the world have heart attacks from being scared or something frightening them, which causes their heart to go into cardiac arrest. Gastrointestinal, heartburn. It's not the heart that's doing it, but it is called heartburn. Somatic symptoms of the stomach due to neurotransmitters in the stomach lining. Basically, you have stomach ache, or you have the queasies, or you feel like you're going to throw up. That's something that absolutely happens when you're talking about stress. I've worked with clients who've gotten news that shocked them, and they immediately threw up. Stomach aches, like I said, the bowel causing diarrhea, constipation. Stress can cause your bowel movements to change. It can either cause you to have blockage, or it can cause you to have diarrhea. And so, again, we talk about health a lot of times. Gastrointestinal health, we're learning, is about as important as anything else you're going to ever talk about when it comes to health. And so having a good gut absolutely helps with the effects of stress. Reproduction, decreased libido. Males, our psyche, our ego is, I hate to say it, tied to our penis a lot of times. And if our psyche or our ego isn't working, neither is our penis. And so for us, you know, there's a direct line straight down the middle of our body to that area. And if something's not going right with our head, especially stress, then other parts of our body are not going to work the way we want them to. Females can lead to absent or irregular moon. You know, so each side of the coin here has differing effects, physical effects that stress creates in them while they are witnessing or experiencing the trauma or the stress. Okay, immediate psychological effects. Hold on a second here. We talked about earlier, flight or fright or freeze. You know, those are the three things that we tend to do when there's a stressor or something stimulates our response. Hypervigilance and hyperarousal. There's a lot of people in our society who are hypervigilant, especially right now, because of stress of COVID, who are hypervigilant about where they go, about the people that they allow into their circle, about the people they allow 6 feet close to them. And there are also people in our society who stress causes hyperarousal. They begin to make really bad, dangerous choices around sexual activity when they're stressed. You know, working with clients for as long as I have, I've seen clients who, for example, find out they're going to have a baby and decide they're going to go cheat on the woman that they're having the baby with. And it's a response to the stress of what is going on in their life. They get a good job or they get a promotion and they go out and get a drunk driving ticket. So a lot of times stress creates hyperarousal in us, and our response to it isn't always positive. It can be positive, but a lot of times we take that energy that comes from stress and anxiety and we turn it towards the negative, and the outcomes are usually detrimental for us to go along with whatever that stressor was. Okay, intermediate effects. These are things, again, everyone's going to be different in how they feel things, how they react to things. So feelings of euphoria and invulnerability, anxiety, fear, irritability, anger, restlessness, grief, apathy, forgetfulness, decreased attention span, blaming, criticizing others. These are all sort of effects of having chronic stress in your life or really intense episodic stress. And so, again, these aren't going to fit everyone. Everyone's not going to experience these. And for the populations that we work with, a lot of times, that information, you're not even going to know about it, or it's going to wrap itself and look something totally different than what you think it is. So a lot of times you have to really vet out these effects to make sure that they are coming from what they're coming from, because we don't tend to work with clients who live in a bubble. They have more than just one thing going on. It's not just stress from, say, substance abuse. It's stress from partner relationships. It's financial stress. It's spiritual stress. You know, it comes from many different ways or many different areas. And so that'll change what the effects look like for each individual client. And then you have to throw in their traumas and what that looks like for them. Prolonged effects of stress and include mental health issues, anxiety, depression, PTSD, survivor's guilt. I saw a lot of survivor's guilt when I came back from Iraq. I had that, you know. I had watched a lot of people die or be maimed while I was overseas. And so when I came back, I was healthy. And I felt guilty about that I somehow was worthy of not being hurt or harmed in this horrible situation. And here my brothers are in boxes or without a leg or without an arm or significant traumatic brain injuries. And so the guilt around that for me was something I had to work through when I got back to the United States. Substance use and other addiction. That's something that we see a lot of. That's probably the majority of what we see. The effects of our stress happening is the substance abuse and addiction. Physical health issues. A lot of our clients are medically fragile. Memory problems. And then another big one is withdrawal and isolation. I personally have a lot of clients who withdraw or isolate when they think the stress is becoming too much. And so I spend a lot of time working those situations out with folks. And so these are the prolonged effects. Now, impact on relationships and community. Taking stress out on each other. I do classes on lateral violence. And that is actually something that we see a lot of too, is everyone, say in a tribe, is stressed, but instead of taking it out on the actual stressors, we take it out on each other. We lash out at those closest to us. Emotionally unavailable to loved ones. We've heard it before. You seem distant, or I don't feel like you're checked in. And that is your partner saying to you, you're somewhere else. You're not here and you're not available to me. And so that is something that we see a lot of. No satisfaction from relationships, including groups, clubs, organizations. So when the stress gets too high for us, a lot of times what we do is we will isolate, we will withdraw. And so things that gave us joy previously, golf, sweat, powwows, whatever it may be, we don't engage in that anymore. We just kind of withdraw and hope that the stress goes away, that we can get back to that. But oftentimes, if there's no active plan to address the stressors, it doesn't go anywhere. And then another big one is feuds. A lot of bad emotions going on out there that are misplaced and pointed in directions that might not necessarily need to be pointed at. And why are we mad at each other in the first place? A lot of times I work with groups, and it's the biggest fight, antagonistic, protagonistic relationships. And at the end of the day, a lot of them can't even tell me what they were mad about to begin with. Lack of community cohesion. Nothing tears down your community's cohesion like a little stress thrown in to a situation to get people sort of opposing each other. We see it a lot in the communities that we work in. A lot of stuff, we talk a good game, but nothing gets done a lot of times. And a lot of going in circles and playing those kind of games. And that can lead to crazy amounts of stress for folks and crazy amounts of dysfunction in the areas that we expect to be clear of that, free of that. Okay, the reason we're all here, ACES. So I'll go into a little detail about ACES, just a small little background about ACES. It originated as an obesity study from Kaiser back in, I want to say the 90s. Kaiser Permanente, San Diego, about 17,000. So it's one of the largest studies ever undertaken, especially around something like stress. But for 17,000 to be involved is a pretty high number. 50-50 male, female, half with college degrees, half without. The one thing that worries me about this, though, is the median age that they studied was 57. And if we're talking about childhood, experiences. 57 is a long way away from childhood. So I would have liked to have seen that median age be a little lower, but oatmeal's better than no meal, I guess. Patients would lose weight from obesity treatment and would gain it back because the root issue was not being addressed. I have beat my head up against the wall for 2 decades now when talking about violence in our communities, because again, we can get the individual happy or healthy, but then what we often do is we place that individual back into the environment they came from, which didn't address the issues to begin with. And so that is one of the things that has always stuck with me about the work that we do is we do, say substance abuse, for instance. We take someone who came from a community, they have a substance addiction, they have some violence issues, some interpersonal issues, and we send them away to treatment. That person comes back to us healthy for all intents and purposes. They've addressed their issues with interpersonal violence, they've addressed their addiction issues, they have a good job. For all intents and purposes, that person we would look at and say that's a success story. But what we haven't done is we haven't addressed the root causes of what caused that addiction to begin with. We haven't addressed the environment that that person came from. We haven't addressed the trauma that that person visited on his family, immediate family, and extended family, and his community or her community. And so we oftentimes place them right back in situations that create problems for them. Let's just be honest. We know that substance abusers will go back to using several times before they ever actually kick the habit for good. And we know that going in. And so same thing with ACEs and the stuff we're talking about. We can't expect any change if we don't go back and look at what caused the behaviors to begin with. Obesity wasn't the problem, but a symptom of the problem. Traumatic events are shocking and emotionally overwhelming situations that may involve actual or threatened death, serious injury, or physical integrity. Reactions to traumatic events may vary considerably, ranging from relatively mild to severe and debilitating. And on that, I've worked with clients who were sexually assaulted. One woman would react to that by getting angry and wanting to mobilize activism around sexual assault and violence. The very next client comes in with the same situation, and it's so severe that she wants to just withdraw from the world altogether. Same emotional trauma, so to speak, for those clients, but very different reactions. And what causes those reactions? They consider vary considerably, range from relatively mild, like I said, to severe. Acute and post-traumatic stress disorders are mental health diagnoses associated with traumatic stress reactions. One of the things I saw coming back to the United States was a lot of my service member brothers had PTSD and didn't know it. We'd have lunch or we would go places and they'd constantly scan the rooftops, or they would constantly watch the exits and the entryways. And that was a direct result of what they had seen overseas while we were in the military. And they came back with all these sort of serious disorders, and a lot of it, they couldn't tell if it was post-traumatic stress disorder or if it was a product of TBI. And that's something they're still kind of trying to figure out now. You know, where does all this stress-related anxiety and activity come from? Is it physical or is it a mental issue? Other difficulties can occur with mental health symptoms, including physical health problems and changes in beliefs about society. Are we changing our beliefs about society right now? You know, 2 weeks ago, it was okay to kill a Black man in the street, right? We had seen it over and over and over and over again. George Floyd is killed, and all of a sudden our whole society's beliefs, or the majority of our society's beliefs, are beginning to change about safety. What does that look like? if you're a middle-aged white woman in America, that safety looks way different than if you're a middle-aged Native American man in our society. And so those are the things, those are the conversations we're having right now, and all because of stress. The stress that is being created from COVID and the social unrest that we have going on is palpable. You can almost taste it in the air. Something needs to give, and we haven't seen what that is yet. We've had a lot of protests and things, but I haven't seen what's the next moves here. So there's a lot of stress floating around, and I think that affects us as a whole. Now, ACEs, childhood experiences and stress. What does that look like? So there's 3 types of ACEs to include abuse, neglect, and dysfunction. Physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, physical and emotional neglect. Now, one of the things that I also am a little disappointed in ACEs, and they haven't done a sort of, I don't know, 2.0 or something, is ACEs doesn't address the spirit at all. As natives, we're very spiritual people, but even if I was just someone else who wasn't native or didn't have native blood, and I was a spiritual person, ACEs wouldn't address that at all. And when we're talking about the traumas that have affected our youth, our children, we're talking about traumas to their spirit, traumas to their life force, basically. Now, household dysfunction, mental illness, incarcerated relatives, substance abuse, mother treated violently, and divorce. And so when we talk about ACEs, these are the things that we always categorize them into. And again, I want you to pay close attention that nothing about spirituality is on here. Vastly more common than we previously had recognized or acknowledged. They have a powerful relationship to adult health and behaviors a half a century later. We know that now because of the studies that have gone on, not just this one, but other studies. We know they have a powerful relationship to how our adult health and behaviors manifest later on in life. Okay, 64% of participants reported at least one. I can't even see that. Hold on a second. I have to move mine. At least one ACE score. If you came out of the ACE scoring and you didn't have any, you probably had a pretty good life as a child. If you experienced one adverse experience, you had an 80% chance of having at least one more. So as soon as you get one, it starts to go downhill pretty fast. 20% had 3, 12% had 4 or more, 16% of men and 20% of women reported childhood sexual abuse, 60% of women, hold on just a second here. Trying to move it around so I can see my slide. 16% of men and 26% of women reported childhood sexual abuse. Think about that. 26% of women. That's more than a quarter of our population of women. 1 out of every 4. 66% of the women in the sample experienced abuse, violence, or household dysfunction in childhood. Think about that now. 66% of the women in the sample. Have a powerful relationship to adult health, and experiences increase. The number of health and social outcomes are also increased. So, of course, the number of ACEs you have, the number of the possibility of your outcomes increases as well. So, obesity, diabetes, substance abuse, mental illness are just some of the adverse reactions that are born out of what your ACEs score can give you. Now, every adult wants a child, obviously. And so what we look at is the breadth of your existence Hold on just a second. I'm trying to figure this out, guys. So your adverse childhood reactions, the bigger they are, the more social, emotional, and cognitive impairment you will have, the more likely you are to adopt risky behaviors, the more likely you are to have disability, social problems, and disease, which is going to lead to early death at the top of the triangle. And so you really want to flip this if possible. And when I say flip this, I mean that's what we as adults should be visiting on our children, is how do we reduce the ACEs for our children currently? What can we do to address the ACEs for our teenagers who have gone through trauma and our young adults? And how is that affecting us as the adults in the room, looking at our traumas realistically as children, and how that affects us today? Okay, again, what impact does it have? A lot of people will say, man, whatever happened to me as a kid doesn't affect who I am today. We know that that's not true. And so what impact does it have? As the number of ACEs increases, so does the risk. And I want to be very, very clear about this. It's not the negative health outcomes, the risk for those negative health outcomes. So you can have 10 ACEs and be a perfectly functioning, healthy adult. But 9 times out of 10, if you have that many ACEs, you're not going to be that. So toxic stress in the young child. Toxic stress can disrupt this. What happened there? Toxic stress can disrupt the development of neural circuits in the brain in early childhood. So one of the things that I was able to study while working on my master's program for social work was the effect of domestic violence or violence on children or babies in utero. One of the things that we learned was that babies can actually develop responses to violence in utero. Their brain begins to develop differently in utero. So we know that as early as, the baby being in the mother's belly, that baby is sensitive to the loud noises, the mother's stress, the mother's anxiety, and what that does for her impacts her baby. High levels of stress hormones can affect the baby's immune system and impact physical health. We know that now. Cortisol, high levels of cortisol can damage the brain, and that's the part of the brain responsible for memory and learning. So you have the most vulnerable of our population, babies, unborn babies, who are being affected by brain damage, basically, before they're even born, because the mother is engaged in a violent relationship. She may not be able to get out of it. And so all of that stress that the mother has is visited on the child. We use the sort of parallel of everything the mother drinks, the baby drinks. Everything the mother experiences, the baby experiences. And so one of the things we've talked about is educating our pregnant women about the importance of having low stress pregnancies, low stress for that 9 months, if possible, where she can control the amount of stuff going on around her, and maybe she needs help, but putting her in situations where she delivers a healthy, happy baby is really important to some of the things that we do here. Okay, what does that look like? Problems with movement or sensation, and biologically we're talking hypersensitivity to physical contact, difficulty and coordination. Let me just see here. Let's see if this helps. I can't move my thing out of the way, so I'm stuck trying to. Stomach problems, physically, again, stomach problems, fast heart rates, difficulty sleeping. When people are stressed out, we know we have trouble sleeping. We know we have stomach problems. Me personally, one of the things that happens when I'm stressed out is I have a hard time sleeping. I run things through my mind over and over and over again as I stare at the ceiling, in the dark. And I can't turn that off sometimes. And so for me, I do my best at working to slow down that cycle in my head, because that's the only way I can really get sleep. If I have a lot going on, it is a lot of times impossible for me to really turn it all off and go to sleep. So intellectually, trouble focusing, completing tasks, understanding their part and what happens to them. Emotionally, difficulty regulating mood, knowing their feelings, low self-esteem, not a clear sense of self, behaviorally, poor impulse control, aggression, or becoming passive or fearful, or have heightened awareness. One of the things I try to do working in my office, we have a huge office, a lot of folks in and out. It's hard to gauge sometimes where people are in their day or their life or whatever. And so I always try, when you have an interaction that doesn't seem as positive as it should be, is to try to give the person I'm interacting with the benefit of the doubt. Now, part of it is heightened because, you're a social worker and that's kind of your job, but I also try to be a good neighbor and a good steward of, what we do. And so I always, when I'm working with someone who may have, some aggressive tendencies or be passive aggressive, is to give them the benefit of doubt and really speak to I don't know what they know, and I haven't experienced what they experience. So that might be what is manifesting in front of me, socially, physically, emotionally, behaviorally, all of that. And so a little patience goes a long way in some of this stuff, is where I'm going. Toxic stress in adolescence. So now we move from the children to more getting closer to the teenagers. Prefrontal cortex development promotes behavioral consequences, appraising danger and safety, meeting long-term goals. All of that's impaired by toxic stress. I'll give you an example. So in high school, I was a really good athlete, and my circle of friends weren't necessarily athletes. They were really good at having fun. And so a lot of times I had to assess behavioral consequences when I hang out with my friends. My father was a very strict, conservative, professional man who didn't talk a lot, didn't, sort of show his emotions, but he had certain expectations. And so one of those expectations is I wouldn't skip school. That's kind of valid, right? But I had the kind of friends who love to skip school in the middle of, whatever's going on, and go to a local lake that we had. It was like that local hangout. And so I always was finding myself assessing the consequences of my behavior. Would my father, who I knew, if he found out what that end result would be, basically a belt to my backside, or the fun, which had more, reward for me. And more often than not, the consequence of the behavior outweighed the fun I knew I was going to have. And so a lot of those trips, I ended up staying at school being bored, because, again, my friends were out skipping and having fun at the lake, and I'm worried about my dad finding out. So toxic stress has its place, good and bad. Appraising danger and safety, that's what I did. The danger of my father's belt versus the safety of my friends and the fun I would have. Okay, what does this look like? People who have really high stress levels and don't know what to do with it are reckless. They're aggressive risk takers. So these are people who are in danger of being re-victimized also. And you see a lot of that behavior when we're talking about women who have high stress levels and they know how to do with it. Reckless sexual behavior, multiple partners, unprotected sex, things like that go on. Emotionally, you feel angry, ashamed, low self-esteem, anxious, depressed, over and underestimating the danger. I love to use, personal stories. I have a friend who has absolutely no emotional piece to his behavior. He is the worst at over or underestimating the danger. We went camping last summer at Lake Englebright. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but it's a lake here in Northern California, a very beautiful lake. And you can camp along these cliffs. Well, we pull up in our boat along these cliffs. The first thing my friend does, he climbs to the top of the cliff and jumps into the lake, probably 70, 80 feet into the water. It didn't take him 2 minutes to know I'm doing that and nothing's going to stop me. In my mind, he was completely underestimating the danger involved in climbing so high and then just deciding he was going to jump into the water. Physically, we have poor sleep habits, disturbed eating. Nothing makes us eat more unhealthy than being stressed out. I think Ben and Jerry's and some of these ice cream makers, the only reason they have lasted as long as they have is because of the amount of stress in our country. Nothing does away with stress for some of us like a pint of Ben and Jerry's or some other confection. Chocolate, that's one of my big sort of sins is chocolate. I love chocolate when I'm stressed. Socially, feeling alone, childish, expecting maltreatment. Intellectually, you underachieve at school. We've all seen those conversations happen where the teacher is really disappointed in the student because they know the student can do better, but the student's just not trying. Well, there's a reason why that student's not trying. That underachievement isn't by design. That underachievement is done in reaction to or in defense of something else, whatever the underlying issue is. Drugs and alcohol. This is something that we work with nonstop in Native country. We see it right now with the opioid crisis and fentanyl, and how that's affecting folks. And so drugs and alcohol and ACEs go together like hot grease and fish, basically. Maltreated children are at third greater risk for using drugs as teenagers. Third greater risk. So right off the bat, if you have children who are being abused or maltreated at home, you can increase their risk by a third to being introduced to drugs as they're teenagers. People with high ACEs scores are more likely to initiate alcohol and illicit drug use at an earlier age. Absolutely. The trauma that they feel, again, that flight, fright, or freeze, poor decision making are all going to go hand in hand. So we would expect these folks who have higher ACEs scores to experiment and be open to drug use at an earlier age than other kids. So people with high ACEs scores are more likely to identify as an alcoholic and to marry an alcoholic. More likely to experience addiction and more likely to have 30 sexual partners and engage in sexual intercourse earlier. Now, I'm not judging anyone, but 30 sexual partners, it doesn't go into detail. Are we talking about lifetime? Are we talking about in 6 weeks? What are we talking about? And so I assume that's lifetime. And engage in sexual intercourse earlier. Is it because of the ACEs or is it something else? We know that Native American children, African American children, Latino children engage in sexual intercourse earlier than their white counterparts or their Asian counterparts. But is that because of stress? Is that culture? Is that environmental? We don't know. One study estimates that as many as 75% of women in treatment for alcoholism have had a history of sexual abuse. I would venture that number is higher because a lot of women just simply aren't going to talk about their mistreatment in treatment for something like alcoholism. We know that those spaces can be not as safe as we want them to be, and so I know a lot of women who just refuse to talk about the abuse, no matter what the situation is. So I always feel like when you see these numbers, add a few percentage points for that population or portion of the population that simply will not talk about it or admit it exists. 50 to 60% of women and 20% of men in chemical dependency programs have reported being victims of sexual abuse. And you can see the sexual abuse numbers going on. Women who have high ACEs score of higher of 4 or more have 78% more likely to inject drugs compared to women who have an ACEs score of 0. Well, we know the ACEs score of 0 is like the unicorn out there. Who has an ACEs score of 0? And so 78% more likely to inject drugs. That's an incredible amount. But you have 4 ACEs to go along with that. So injection of drugs is a unique sort of circumstance. What we know from studies and evidence-based research is that most women would prefer not to inject themselves with a drug. They would prefer to snort it or take it as a pill or some other form due to the effects of what that looks like. Now, a male with ACE score of 6 has a 46-fold or 4,600% increased risk in becoming an injection drug user later in life. 4,600% increase by having 6 ACEs. Now, what worries me also about ACEs, guys, is what are the ACEs scores that are the most telling? Is it the abuse? Is it neglect? Or is it the dysfunctional home piece? So what if I have 6 pieces of my ACEs score and they're all in one area, say substance abuse, or not substance, I'm sorry, in household dysfunction, and I don't have anything in neglect or abuse? How does that present itself to me later in life, and what does that look like? Okay, intergenerational stress. This is something we talk about on a regular basis in trainings. If you are in native country longer than 5 minutes, you will hear the term intergenerational stress, intergenerational trauma. And so what are we talking about? It's stored in the genes. We know this now from research done in the previous 10 years that we can scar our DNA and it's passed on to future generations if we don't heal it. And one of the ways we talk about healing, and you'll hear this a lot, is resiliency. Teaching resiliency, fostering resiliency. And how do we influence the next generation? There's 2 ways. You can direct transmission via DNA, or you can change, hold on just a second here, adaptation by the children. The child decides to break the cycle, right? In utero, nutrients are given. So these are the ways that you can kind of address traumas and affect some of the stuff that goes on. In utero, nutrients given are positive and negative. If you have a mom who is an alcoholic, those nutrients aren't going to look the same as a mom who is fully engaged in a healthcare program and has, an HMO and is going to yoga and all those kind of things. The nutrition is going to look different. Exposure to toxins, alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. The big one I want us to pay attention to is pollution. A lot of times in native populations, the access to something as simple as clean water, clean air, those are the things that are going to affect the baby in utero. Physical violence and other trauma. That baby is absolutely going to be affected by the violence that it hears the mother going through, the violence that the mother's body creates, the different hormones and chemicals to address. They're all going to flood that baby's system as that baby's developing in utero. After birth, again, back to nutrition. One of the best things you can do is have your baby eat healthy. Exposure to toxins, again, all those things are still there. Violence and trauma, 0 to 2 and 2 to 5, we know are the most crucial times for brain development with babies. If there's something that's traumatizing that baby during that time, it is absolutely going to affect the baby's intellect and intelligence and the way the baby's brain develops. And these are some examples. So intergenerational transmission, number 1, the mother. Mother experienced physical violence and smoke during her pregnancy. She had a baby. That baby is easily startled due to increased cortisol. Never received treatment. The baby has asthma due to the mother smoking. The father continues to engage in physical violence towards the mother. Daughter picks up drinking alcohol to numb the pain. Now, that is bad enough, and that sounds like a pretty hard life to be working through and trying to find happiness and health, right? Well, let's have a baby. So the grandchild is born with what we call FAS, fetal alcohol syndrome. Is easily startled by loud noises due to the parenting style of the mom, who, if we recognize the mom's situation, it makes sense why the mom's style is not conducive to a healthy baby, right? So does not meet the grandparents due to her mother's broken relationship. The mother realized that, hey, my mom, was not the most positive person. I don't want to be around her. And so thinking that I'm going to get away from my mom to help my daughter, the grandchild doesn't have that connection to elders, to the family, sort of what we call the family line, the ancestry of all of that stuff, the knowledge that the grandmother would have. So she feels isolated and disconnected from her culture. And what happens? She develops depression along with who knows what else, right? So this is one of the ways that we can watch intergenerational trauma work its way out in just very quick amount of time, very short time span. We can see how from mother, daughter to grandchild, the impact of the trauma that happens. Okay, let's try another one. Mother experienced physical violence and smoke during the pregnancy, left the father and went to a domestic violence shelter where she received treatment and case management. Moves in with the sister who's stabling on the red road. Okay, she has a daughter. Easily startled due to exposure, receives treatment at community clinic. Asthma due to mother smoking during pregnancy, grows up with mother and auntie support her parents. Inquires about the father. She joins sports teams and channels that energy and to diminish that easily startled response, right? Well, she has a baby. And that cute little baby is born with asthma due to genetic influence of both mother and daughter. Knows maternal family and feels connected with culture. Is supported by the mother to join activities that interest. Hold on just a second here. Sorry, guys. Keep having to move my stuff out of the way so I can see. That interests the grandchild. So what you have is a daughter and a grandchild who've broken the cycle of trauma thanks to some small pieces that the mother did, which was to leave the father and go to that domestic violence shelter and receive treatment and case management. She has a support system with the sister who is stable and on Red Road, right? So those few small things set the groundwork for what the daughter and the grandchild would have happen to them in ways they would address the trauma. Resiliency. We must try to pass on resiliency, strength, and health to our future generations. We can't control all the factors, but we must pass the goodness that we can control. Now, I'll go back here. In both of these scenarios, at certain points during the sort of vignette, there were things that could have been said or done to make the next generation not have the situation happen the way it did. And that was resiliency. The mother in those instances, one decided to tap into her resiliency, the other one didn't. Maybe she didn't know how. Intergenerational. From one generation to the next. When an individual or the ancestor experience trauma, their response may be logical because the trauma affected the emotional and physical symptoms of the brain: addiction, substance abuse, violence, withdrawal, dysregulation of emotion, and constant physical health issues. One of the things that we see a lot of, or I see a lot of in Native country, is when I'm working with clients, especially my older clients, they have a lot of physical health issues that are, and it's almost impossible to tell if the physical health is a product of the trauma and the anxiety and the mental health side, or the vice versa. And so there's always this constant battle between medical and behavioral health, like which is more important for the client, which is the best remedy for whatever traumas the client is going through. And they both have their parts. And I don't think we're going to be able to fix whatever's going on with that client unless we address both. The behavioral, the physical, and then the third piece would be the spiritual. I'm a big believer that unless you can fix the spiritual piece of this trauma that this person is having, or at least address it, you're going to see modest sort of success at best. Historical trauma responses is a myriad of features that are seen amongst a group of people. And Native Americans, for example, we always hear about the Trail of Tears and forced relocation and those sort of things with the Native Americans. Jewish Holocaust survivors, Japanese American intern camp survivors and their descendants, African Americans. You know, there's been a lot of genocides just since I've been alive. The amount of genocides are incredible in places like Vietnam, Cambodia with the Khmer Rouge, Armenian, which we don't talk a lot about, and Turkey refuses to even acknowledge even happens. You know, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Cuba, and what Castro did while he was the dictator there. And so mental health symptoms, depression, PTSD, anxiety, suicidality. A lot of our clients have suicidality from the trauma that they have experienced, from the violence they have experienced. Hypervigilance, dreams of traumatic experiences of ancestors. I have clients who tell me on a regular basis they dreamed, and it was a dream that they were someone, one of their ancestors, and they relived the ancestor's trauma or death. Dysregulation of emotion. When we say dysregulation, when you see inappropriate responses to stimuli or trauma. Doesn't make sense for someone to laugh when they hear that someone passed away, but that's what we mean when we say deregulation or dysregulation. Like the response doesn't fit whatever the situation they're encountering is. Self-destructing behavior. Again, I talked about the sexually active men and women. We see this a lot in teenagers. Overeating, self-neglect, self-harm, and substance abuse. We see all of this when we're talking about trauma, historical or present. Okay, everyday life stressors versus adverse childhood experiences versus intergenerational trauma. That's a big pile of all kinds of bad stuff going on. Surviving intergenerational trauma requires intergenerational resilience. It's not enough for your grandmother to be resilient. Your mom will need to be resilient, and you are going to have to carry that also. And how do we do that? We do that a lot by culture. You know, getting to know our culture, getting to understand the strength that our ancestors had, the strength that our grandparents had, and seeing the lives that they lived and how they were able to prosper. That's that resilience that that is required to successfully come out of, you know, early childhood trauma and be okay, be healthy. Culture as a protective factor to strengthen resilience. I am one of the biggest proponents of culture as a protective factor. Almost militant in my stance of that. I think that culture is one of the most important pieces of ourselves that we can hold on to, we can research, we can understand how strong it is, and we can rely on that in our times of need. So connectedness to others, not feeling alone. I see it when we do an event every year in June, which is geared towards our youth. And we have youth come from all over the state to participate. And the feeling that I have when I see all these Native teenagers in a room together, all tied by their culture and their histories, and that feeling of connectedness that I see them develop, gives me goosebumps every time I see it, because it's not something they get to see every day. It's not something that they are taught every day, and it's not something that they may be exposed to any other time. And so when we have this group of 50 to 70 teenagers in a room, and that energy that only teenagers can create is there, and it's all these different, you know, Native teens coming together, that is one of the best feelings I have had as a clinician, to watch that develop and kind of prosper the last few years with those teenagers. And what happens is they leave our youth camp and they stay in touch with each other. So now they not only have the local resilience of their families and the environment that they come from, but they know if they live in Eureka, there's a teenager going through the same thing in San Diego, or maybe LA, or maybe the Bay Area, or maybe here in Sacramento somewhere. But what they know is they're not alone. And that is huge for us. Strong familial ties I'm a big proponent in keeping your family close. As a Native man, one of my main goals is to make sure that my family is always protected, always has what they need. And so that's that strong familial tie. And I say this also, some of my closest family members are not related by blood. That familial tie doesn't necessarily have to be a blood relative. For me, some of my strongest bonds are with people I was in Iraq with. They know things about me and my family might not ever know. And so familial ties can look different to different people. Mentoring friends in the community. I have had the pleasure of having some really great mentors and even better friends. But some of my mentors have been absolutely amazing in shaping my resilience and my sort of stances on things. And my friends also, I try to surround myself with people who are strong and brave. And I always say I love friends who aren't perfect. They got a few kinks in their hair. You know, they're not beautiful. They got a mole here, there. They're just, I love imperfect people because those are the realest people to me. And so having those relationships and friends like that in the community, I think is beneficial to us all. Spiritual and cultural leaders and healers. Again, it is vitally important that our youth, our young folks, and even our adults understand their spiritualness and their culturalness and where it comes from and the rich history behind it. And it always is encouraging when I see elders at events. I love to do events in certain areas because I know I'm going to have the raucous, rowdy elders show up who are not going to take any lip from anybody because they lived it, seen it, and done it. And those are our strong leaders in our community. Those are our healers. Those are the people that we go to in our times of need. And so I love to see those folks involved. And a lot of times our spiritual and cultural leaders aren't necessarily involved in this work. And I think it's important that we pull them in and give them some guidance in helping because they're vitally important. And the last one, elders. Nothing is as important in my mind to our Native culture as having our elders who are the knowledge holders, the cultural sort of leaders, be active in what goes on in our families, in our communities, and as a whole. So in my mind, anytime I can pull elders into a training, a conversation, anything, it always is a benefit. And I'll point out, the United States is one of the few places in the world where we don't value getting old. Once you hit a certain age in our country, it's almost like you're deemed a throwaway. You know, we have a leader in this country who would sacrifice all the elderly if he could open the country back up economically. And so those kind of things really weigh heavily on my heart. You look at places like, I'll use Japan for example. It is actually a sign of respect and a sign of family richness if your elders, the grandparents, the great-grandparents live with you, because they get to teach the younger babies what it is to be Japanese or to be whatever that family's name is and Japanese. And so we don't do that in this country. As soon as you hit 65, it's like, okay, mom, you want to live in an old folks home, or you're gonna go live with your brother, or what are you gonna do? We oftentimes really don't want our elderly for some reason around, and it does such a detriment to a community. You lose that history, that it's a living sort of record of where your family has been and what it's been through. And so I always encourage people to engage our elders in the community if possible. Other protective factors, positive relationships. Well, yeah, positive relationships are very protective factors, but we don't always get the benefit of having positive relationships with our family, with our friends, with our schools, with our communities. If every one of those relationships was good for every one of us, we wouldn't have a lot of problems. but we know that that's not the case. And so what usually happens is, out of these 4, and there are more relationships that can happen, absolutely, some of them are just not going to be positive. We see it a lot with family members at war with each other. You know, friends. Over the last few weeks on Facebook, I've watched people who have been friends 30 years basically talk terribly to each other and then unfriend each other, you know. And so watching that dynamic play out during our social unrest and COVID times is kind of heartbreaking. And high self-esteem and self-worth. Yeah, if I got high self-esteem and self-worth, I probably don't have a big ACES score or a lot of trauma in my life. Spiritual or religious involvement. This is always a positive in my mind when it's positive. It's not always positive, but when it is, it can be a great thing to be involved in and to help relieve or address trauma. Education. One of the things I love to tell my friends is it's really important for you to be educated so that you can see the things that have affected you and understand ways to change them. If you're not educated in the things that you need to know, how do you know how to address them? And oftentimes we don't. And so I always push education, and education doesn't mean a degree. Education in my mind means teaching yourself or learning from others, always wanting to learn something new. It's kind of a running joke in my office. I'll go to any training that's open that they'll allow me to be a part of. And I hear from my coworkers, why do you want to be in that training? Because it's something I don't know. And I refuse to let that stand. If I can learn about it and my job is going to say, yeah, you can do this, then why wouldn't I do that? That's only going to help me as a father, as a husband, as a professional, as a social worker, as a friend, all of those things. So the more education you have, the better off you're going to be. Employment. Yeah, we all want a good job, right? But a lot of times the trauma and the ACES score we have won't allow for that. You know, a lot of folks who suffer childhood trauma jump from job to job. They have a hard time staying in a job. They have a hard time keeping a job for very long, because once they get in that position and they start to interact with others, it becomes clear that there's trauma of some kind there, and it makes for very bad employment rates for those folks. Those same folks have issues with physical health. A lot of times, these are going to be your folks who call out sick a lot or have ailment after ailment. And so healthy employees are a good thing. I've worked at several companies and agencies where they would give us free gym memberships if we showed that we had gone to the gym at least 2 or 3 days a week. They would pay for the membership. That was the company investing in the good physical health of its employees, which again turned around to help the company. And so I wish we had more sort of things like that going on for employees and companies. I think that's a good way to be mutually beneficial to each other. You ensure that my health is on point by helping me get into the sports club, which can be expensive, we know. And I, in turn, stay with the company longer, am healthier. I have fewer sick days and fewer days out because of sickness or medical issues. Okay, I'm a social worker, so of course we have to have, you know, the graphics of the violence. You see these everywhere you go, any training you do, and they're all kind of the same. The healing journey, breaking the cycle of violence and harm. So the violence and harm starts, we begin our breaking out, you know, and one of two things is going to happen. You're either going to continue with that circle or cycle of violence, or you're going to find a way to get yourself out of that circle and break it. Now, this is way harder if you're, say, looking at this and you're a survivor of domestic violence. A lot of this is going to look like rubbish. And everyone's situation is obviously going to be different. But this is what we know from the research is if that victim can break that cycle, not just their life is going to be better, the next generation is going to be better. And the generation after that is going to be better. A mother can have 20 years of domestic violence go on and find out she's pregnant, move on from that relationship, make good choices, and that child will be born into a situation where they never knew the trauma that the mother went through. Or she can make the choice to stay in that trauma. Healing from trauma requires breaking out of the cycle, like I said. And that's way easier to say or to put on the graphic than to actually live. You know, a lot of our clients, our survivors can explain to you how hard it is when the perpetrator has all the finances, controls the car, controls the access to your friends and your family. It looks really clean and neat on paper right here. But I want to caution everyone that breaking out of this cycle is messy. And for most of the people who do it, it's probably going to be the hardest thing they've ever done or will do. And so we'll go through. So if you want to breaking out of the cycle, you begin to express your thoughts and feelings, accepting what happened, confront those fears. You know how hard it is to confront the person who is your batterer or your abuser, and how much strength and resiliency that takes. Asking the why then, why did they do it? Willingness to take risks. Again, when I'm thinking of this, I'm thinking in terms of domestic violence, and to take that risk for the woman involved in a domestic violence relationship has to be one of the hardest things I think we could ever even think of, to take the risk to actually believe that I can get away from this. And so working with them, understanding their story and approaching them, choosing to forgive, because a lot of times what we have, our survivors have a lot of guilt. You know, they have a lot of guilt of what it caused for themselves, what it caused for their children, and how it looks for whoever their partner is that they're leaving. There's just a lot of guilt there. And the survivors oftentimes hold on to that more than others. Okay, making things right, justice. I'm a firm believer in restorative justice here and what that looks like. And then discovering our story and possibility of reconciliation. As much as I hate to say, oh my gosh, this would be terrible, it happens. And as clinicians, as professionals, we need to be ready for that possibility that this person could do all this work to get themselves free of all the things they were worried about. And the possibility of them reconciling is absolutely out there. And so we as clinicians need to understand that dynamic, and we need to know it's there and be addressing it. Questions, comments? I haven't heard anything, seen anything. I feel like I've been talking to a computer for an hour and a half. Wow.
You have,
So
Rain.
any questions at all? Hopefully we can open it up. And
what I'm going to do really quick is I'm going to give everybody.
I'm sorry, that went so fast.
That's okay. I'm just going to give everybody a heads up that I am taking you off mute. So if you want to stay on mute, you'll have to either let me know or just mute yourself right back up. So give me just a minute. And if you have questions as I go down this list here, feel free to ask. There's none in the question box. You're welcome to type them in there as well. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, so one thing that we do, I'm going to take it and since nobody has a question at this point, I'm going to stop the recording. Rain, I don't know if you walked away, but it said no questions, but great information. I'm going to stop the recording, and if you have a question that you'd like to ask not on the recording, you can do it in that space. So 1 second. Ooh. Hearing. Okay, so the recording has stopped. If anyone has a question, we can take it now.
Well, this is Keely. I just want to tell Rain thank you and apologize for my technical difficulties. I lost complete control of my computer. I couldn't mute. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't type. Nothing.
No worries at all. We got through it, and that's most important. I'm
Yes.
appreciative that you guys would have me be a part of this. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. We appreciate it too. So, and I'm glad we at least got through the video portion.
Yeah, that wasn't so bad.
Yeah, it was pretty good. So I don't have anything in the question box. Oh, wait, I lied. We just got one. Can I get this email? Somebody missed the first portion of it. Are you going to send us your slides, Rain?
You guys already have it.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. Okay, great.
So yes,
Okay,
whoever
that's-
wants it, they can absolutely have access to it. It's a training that I do on a regular basis. So
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just send it out to everyone that attended.
perfect. And Keely, can I get a list of the folks who were attending today? Is that possible?
I can send it to you, Rain.
You rock. Thank you so much. Well, if
You're
you don't have
welcome.
any questions,
Yeah, I think we're good.
all right. Well, thank you, and thank everyone who was a part of this.
Yes, thank you all very much, and we'll see you Friday.
See you Friday.
All right, bye.
Thank you.